Achilles gave him a very clear order. Patroclus was allowed to put on Achilles' armor and drive the Trojans away from the ships. Once the ships were safe, he had to come back at once. He must never chase them to the walls of Troy. Patroclus entered the battle, wearing Achilles' gear. The two had grown up together, and both had been trained by Chiron. In the heat of battle, everyone mistook him for Achilles, with morale swinging on both sides. The Greeks finally clawed their way back from the brink. That was where the trouble began. Patroclus did not stop. He was only meant to save the ships and then return to Achilles. Instead, victory went to his head. He kept cutting down Trojans, crossed the trench, and drove on toward the city of Troy. And in that pursuit, just as fate had ordained, he struck down Sarpedon, son of Zeus. From heaven Zeus watched his son fall and did not change his fate. He only sent down bloody rain to mourn for him. By then Patroclus had been carried away by victory. He kept on pursuing the Trojans, with Achilles' warning already forgotten. That was the root of his tragedy. Had he obeyed Achilles and returned after saving the ships, he might still have escaped death. Yet Zeus's will outweighed mortal judgment. The gods can give men courage, and they can turn that courage into destruction. Apollo emerged from the mist behind him and struck him in the back with a blow full of divine force. It left him reeling, shattered his weapons, and stripped away his armor. In an instant, Patroclus became little more than a lamb for slaughter, and fell beneath Hector's spear. With his last breath he whispered that death was already standing beside Hector, and soon Hector too would die by Achilles' hand. That moment changed everything. Hector stripped from Patroclus the divine armor of Achilles and put it on himself, thinking he had won immense glory, when in truth, it was a direct insult to Achilles. What followed was a savage struggle over the body of Patroclus. The fighting was brutally intense. Both sides were no longer pulling at a corpse alone, but at honor itself and the future course of the war. If the Trojans seized the body, they would utterly disgrace Achilles. If the Greeks recovered it, they could at least preserve some final shred of dignity. Then, the news reached Achilles that his dearest friend was dead. Achilles let out a terrible cry of grief, a cry shot through with the divine blood of his sea-born mother. Homer says that the sound pierced the earth and exploded in the cold depths of the sea. The surface of the water began to churn, and all the sea nymphs rose up like white-crested waves, rolling onto the Trojan shore. The Thais came into her son's tent and held Achilles' head as she wept with him. In that moment, the grief of a goddess of the sea and the despair of a mortal merged into one. Achilles admitted that Zeus had indeed fulfilled the prayer he had once made. The Greeks had been driven back to the ships because he stayed away. They had suffered terribly. His honor, it seemed, had been vindicated, but the price had been terrible. His grief quickly hardened into an unstoppable resolve. He no longer cherished life, nor wished to remain by the ships. He wanted only one thing, to kill Hector and repay blood with blood. When Thetis heard what he meant to do, she understood at once that another and heavier fate was already drawing near. She knew that once Hector died, Achilles' own death would come soon after. Achilles no longer held back. In his eyes, since he had failed to help when Patroclus was killed, death itself no longer frightened him. This greatest hero of his age, forged by the Styx and by heavenly fire, cast life and death aside. The Iliad was entering its final act. Thetis knew she could not stop him. She only reminded Achilles that his bright bronze armor had fallen into Hector's hands. Thetis told Achilles to wait, not to rush straight back into battle. She herself would go to Olympus and ask Hephaestus, god of fire, to forge a new set of armor for him. He knew he could not change Achilles' doomed short life, but he could at least forge him something that would astonish the world and bring it back by sunrise. So the divine smith lit his forge, fed bronze, gold and silver into the fire, and began his work. He forged the most famous divine artifact in the whole Iliad, the shield of Achilles. Upon that shield, Hephaestus engraved the whole world: earth, sea, sun and stars, cities rejoicing in weddings, and cities consumed by war, farmers plowing, fields ready for harvest, ripe vineyards, and running cattle. There was war, and there was peace. There was death, and there was life. It was as if All mortal destiny had been compressed into that single shield. When the shield was finished, Achilles' revenge was ready to begin. Achilles called an assembly of the whole army. At last he set aside his quarrel with Agamemnon. He admitted that this rage had already cost too many Greeks their lives. Now Patroclus was dead. There was no point in quarreling any longer. He declared that he would return to battle and take vengeance on the Trojans himself. Thus, the two Greek leaders were formally reconciled. Zeus then gathered the gods on Olympus and told them that Achilles had returned to battle. If no god intervened, the Trojans would never be able to withstand him. He might even take Troy before its fated hour. This time, Zeus let the gods enter the field freely, let each help whichever side he chose, and so the gods divided into two camps. Hera, Athena, Poseidon, Hermes, and Hephaestus stood with the Greeks. Ares, Apollo, Artemis, Leto, Aphrodite, and the river god Scamander stood with the Trojans. The battlefield was no longer merely a war of mortals. The gods themselves had formally entered it, all because Achilles was advancing once more. Zeus thundered in the heights, Poseidon shook the earth below, and even Hades in the underworld was alarmed, afraid Poseidon might split the earth open and expose the realm of the dead. On the battlefield below, the only man Achilles wanted was Hector. The first enemy he met was Aeneas. Aeneas knew how terrifying Achilles was. He had nearly died by Achilles' hand before. Yet under Apollo's urging, he still stepped forward to face him. Before the strongest of living men, Aeneas lasted only a few exchanges before he was nearly killed by Achilles. At the critical moment, Poseidon intervened. Though Poseidon favored the Greeks, he knew Aeneas was not fated to die here. In the future, Aeneas' line would carry on the blood of Troy. And from that line, in later legend, would come Romulus. If Diomedes' stone had struck a few inches differently, Rome itself might never have been born. So Poseidon cast a mist over Achilles' eyes and carried Aeneas out of the battle. Achilles saw his enemy vanish. He knew the gods had intervened. He did not stop, because Aeneas had never been his true target. His true target was Hector. From that moment on, the battlefield became almost Achilles' personal killing ground. Homer says, he was like a savage mountain fire, sweeping through a dry forest, the flames spreading on the wind, and devouring the trees in the valley. He hunted enemies down, stabbed them, and dyed the black earth red with blood. Achilles' revenge was utterly out of control. The Trojan army broke before him, and was driven all the way into the river outside Troy. What followed was savagery at its most extreme. Achilles, sword in hand, leapt into the freezing river and butchered men as if he were lopping branches from a tree. His great sword made a heavy, blunt sound as it struck human flesh. The whole river ran red with blood. The men Achilles killed, along with their armor, piled up across the water like a long embankment, nearly choking the bloody river itself. Such madness at last provoked the wrath of the cosmic order. The river god could no longer endure the pollution of his home. He rose in human shape from the deep whirlpool and gave raging Achilles one last warning. He rebuked him. This slaughter had already gone beyond mortal limits. The river itself could barely reach the sea. This massacre had to end at once. Achilles, though, at the height of his fury, no longer even respected the gods. He answered the river god proudly that he would not stop killing until he had driven Hector back into the city and tested, in that fated duel, which of them was meant to live and which to die. Having said that, Achilles leapt once more into the rushing waters. This open contempt for divine authority finally drove the god into fury. The river god raised a violent surge, like a towering wall of water, and hurled it against Achilles. Even Achilles, with his deathless body and unmatched speed, felt despair and fear. Before the true power of a god, what he feared was not death itself, but the shame of drowning, like a nobody, in some muddy ditch. At that critical moment, Queen Hera sent Hephaestus down to save him. He turned, squared his shoulders, and faced Achilles head-on. Before they fought, Hector tried to make a final honorable pact. Whoever won, neither should dishonor the other's body. By then Achilles had become a beast of vengeance. He roared back coldly, "There are no covenants between lions and men. Nor can wolves and lambs share one heart. One of them had to fall. One man's blood had to feed Ares, Patroclus, and so many Greeks Hector had cut down, must all be paid for by Hector himself." Hector hurled his spear first. It struck Achilles' divine shield and glanced away. Hector turned and called for another spear from his brother. He found no one behind him. At once he understood. The gods had tricked him. His hour had come. Yet the hero did not collapse. He drew the sharp sword at his waist and launched himself like a last attack of an eagle diving from the sky. The irony was that the armor Hector wore was the very gear he had stripped from Achilles' dearest friend. Achilles knew that armor's flaws better than anyone. At a glance he found the fatal gap between collarbone and throat. One thrust drove the spear through Hector's tender neck, but did not cut the windpipe, leaving him just enough breath to speak. Achilles meant not only to kill him, but to break his spirit as well. Standing over Hector, he declared his triumph. He told him that when he killed Patroclus, he must have thought no reckoning would come, because Achilles was still far off by the ships. Now, dogs and vultures would tear at Hector's corpse, while Patroclus would receive a Greek funeral. With his last breath, Hector foretold that Achilles too would die beneath the walls. Achilles answered the dying Hector that he would meet death when Zeus and the other gods decreed. He wrenched his spear from Hector's body, stripped off the blood-soaked armor, pierced the tendons behind Hector's heels, threaded rawhide thongs through them, and tied the feet to the back of his chariot, leaving the head to drag on the ground. He climbed aboard, took Hector's armor with him, and lashed the horses into a run. Hector's body was dragged face down behind him. Dust billowed up. That once handsome head of his kept striking the earth until it was fouled with dirt. From the walls came the cries of Hector's father and mother, and the fainting collapse of his wife before her grief. Here Homer shows us a tragedy both savage and painfully real. Hector's fear and his flight make him more human, but the moment he turned and faced death completed the final elevation of his character. The fires of battle died down. What remained among the ruins was divine indifference, the victor's emptiness, and a whole city's grief. Achilles had slaughtered his way across the field, and at last killed the man who slew his friend. He had even humiliated the body. His revenge was complete. By all logic, he should have felt relief. He did not, though. Back in the Greek camp, and looked on Patroclus's cold body, the pain he had long suppressed did not lessen in the least. It erupted like a volcano instead. With the whole army beside him, he mounted the chariot and circled his friend's body again and again, weeping aloud. Late into the night, the army cried itself out, and finally drifted off to sleep. Achilles alone lay stretched beside the surf on the shore, and finally closed his exhausted eyes. As sleep finally took him, the ghost of Patroclus came quietly to him. The face, the eyes, even the familiar voice, were exactly as they had been in life. The spirit said softly, "My dear friend, have you forgotten me? You sleep soundly enough, but I am still unburied. The spirits by the Styx will not let me cross the river. I can only wander before the gates of Hades. Burn me quickly and let me come to rest. And since we were raised together, when your time comes, place our ashes in the same golden urn. Never let us be parted." Achilles was shattered by these words. He reached out to embrace his friend, but caught only empty air. The ghost dissolved like smoke. Achilles woke with a start, and understood why Patroclus had returned. He had not yet been buried. At dawn the next morning, Achilles gave his friend a magnificent funeral. By that point, the dead had been laid to rest, but the living were still not at peace. Looking upon the grieving, exhausted Greeks, Achilles decided to raise their spirits in the way the ancient Greeks valued most. With a grand memorial contest, there was boxing, there was racing, and at last the dead stillness. And sorrow hanging over the camp began to lift. After one splendid event after another, the heroes of the Greek army spent their strength and finally poured out their pent-up grief. Once the games were over, the Greeks gradually dispersed and went back to their ships. Most men were thinking only of was food, drink, and sleep. Achilles was different. He was still sunk in grief and could not sleep at all. Thinking of all this, Achilles wept without stop. So each morning Achilles would tie Hector's body behind his chariot and drag it around the tomb of Patroclus, racing 3 savage laps in desecration and humiliating the corpse again and again. Yet Apollo still pitied Hector. Though Hector was dead, Apollo kept guarding his body, so it would not be ruined by the dragging. Achilles, still consumed by rage, went on desecrating Hector's remains again and again. The gods looked down on this and began to feel pity as well. At last even Zeus could bear it no longer. He issued his command: Achilles must release the body, and a goddess was sent to old Priam, king of Troy, telling him to bring ransom to the Greek camp and recover his son's corpse. When the old king came before Achilles, he dropped to his knees and kissed the hands, stained with his son's blood. He begged Achilles humbly to think of his own aged father far away at home. Those words shattered the ice of hatred in Achilles' heart. The 2 mortal enemies wept together in the tent and found reconciliation in their shared grief. In the end, Achilles recovered his humanity and his dignity. He washed the body and gave it back himself, and even promised a 12-day truce. That very night, the old king carried his son back to Troy. Throughout the truce, the whole city held a solemn funeral for its hero. And there, in the blaze of Hector's funeral pyre, the Iliad came to its close. It does not end with the fall of Troy, nor with the death of Achilles, but with a father reclaiming his son's body, an enemy restoring dignity to the dead, and a hero finally laid to rest. This is not a victorious ending, but one of pity. The war was not yet over. Troy's fate still hung in the future, and Achilles' own death was drawing near. Yet Homer chose to rest his final gaze on Hector's funeral, because what this epic leaves us with is not only the memory of how heroes kill, but also whether, after the furthest hatred, they can still remember pity, dignity, and the shared humanity that stands before death.